I'm not okay with this book. I'm really not okay with it. Hello, my bookworms, and welcome to today's review on Yellowbirds by Kevin Powers. This book, I am not remotely okay with this book, and I know everybody's getting that initial feeling of, oh god, she's ranting again. And this is not a rant. This is a personal, emotional, draining book that I'm just not okay with. It was beautifully written. It was profoundly written at that, but I'm not okay with it. It hits too close to home, and it's just I'm not okay with it. Last time there was no synopsis to really give you guys. I told you that it's kind of like a memoir, fictional story in the same token, and I'm not even sure what this really is. It's a fictional story, but it's told kind of almost like a biography memoir, and that's maybe what really bothers me is that it is so real that it actually makes you stop and put the book down and go, no. This book is 226 pages. I read it all. It just took me a long time because, as I said, you have to put the book down because you just emotionally cannot go on with it, and you have to put it down. You have to walk away from it because it's just, oh my god. I told you guys I'm not too keen on war books, and that stands as true, especially right now, because this book, Yellowbird, deals with the current war that is going on, the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Kuwait. This is the story that Kevin Powers has told. He has changed names, and I'm not sure how much is accurate, but in reading it and how realistic it actually feels, and knowing people who have been in war, it's too close to home. Everyone I've ever talked to knows at least one person who has gone to war, and I'm lucky enough that every single person I know has come back. I mean, granted, they have come back really, really screwed up at times, but they came back. And I understand some people aren't as lucky, but in reading this book, I couldn't. It's just, to think that people actually have to go through this is just horrendous. I'm going to give you guys my own quick synopsis of this book, and I'm not going to do what I liked and what I didn't like because I really did enjoy the story, the whole entire story, but and there's nothing really wrong with the story. It's one of those books that you read and you just like emotionally drain from it. If you guys are looking to get into this book, my only advice to you is one, make sure you are mentally prepared to do this because there are some bits in there that if you read, you're not going to be okay. Like, seriously, you're not. Another thing is pay attention to dates because this book goes from 2004 up to 2009, but it's not in chronological order. It just kind of flips around. So you will be in the past with him when he's in war, and then in the future where, he's back at home, and then when he's traveling home, what he experiences. And you really have to pay attention to dates because if not, you're gonna have to backtrack, and then you're just kind of thrown for a loop, and you're just, yeah. The main character in the story, his name is Martel. He's about, I would say, 18 years old, just signed up for the war, and has been dispatched to Iraq. He makes friends with some guy named Murphy, and their sergeant is Sterling. And this is important because those are the main characters in this story. My bad. The main character's name is Bartle, not Martel, it's Bartle. I don't know how I got that mixed up, but there's Murphy, Bartle, and Sterling, and they're the main ones. And the story is told through the eyes of Bartle, or Bartel. So you have the main character, Bartle, who makes friends with Murphy. Their sergeant is Sterling, and they're all in the same platoon or whatever. And it's just basically in that time frame their story of Iraq and what they had to go through. I'm gonna do it this way. We're gonna do when they're in Iraq, when he's traveling home, and then when he's at home because that's the easiest way to do this. So you have Bartle who makes friends with Murphy, and he kind of makes this stupid promise to Murphy's mother that he would make sure that Murphy's safe and that he comes home, and we all know that is a stupid promise to make. The story in the beginning is actually really slow. It's kind of confusing almost. You do, however, get that first emotional tug, that first, what reaction when a translator, an Iraqi translator, is killed. I say you feel that emotional tug because it's not necessarily for the translator. You do feel bad that he was killed, but it's the reactions of the soldiers that actually really throw you because they don't care. There is the one quote of, "It's just a translator. Oh, he's another Iraqi." And you just kind of sit there and you go, oh my god, you start to kind of realize how brainwashed, and I don't mean brainwashed as in government corrupted them to go off and kill, but you have to, in a sense, kind of default yourself so that way you don't have this reaction to people being killed all the time, because if that happens, you're probably going to go insane. So, the reactions were normal, I suppose, for a soldier because they constantly see this. But to read it as someone who's still that's a human being is just very traumatic and strange. They end up having to go through a town to get to their next set point, and along the way they're ambushed and a soldier gets killed. Everyone, all of his platoon members, are standing there watching, and the one says, "Oh, I was expecting him to say something," and you still just kind of sit there oh my god, and it's so gruesome and so real that you're just sitting there oh god. Now, the worst part is this kid doesn't die right away. They take him back to base where he is sent into a tent with a nurse, and, there's horrific screaming, and you get Bartle and Murphy talking to each other, trying to comfort each other about this because they knew this guy, but not really knew him. They just knew he was part of their platoon, and they still have that bond, but they weren't friends or whatever. And they, are talking, and then all of a sudden all the screams go silent. This is when, you start to actually connect to the main characters, because you can see how this affected Murphy, and he's not okay with it either. So he kind of wanders off for a period of time, and when Bartle ends up finding him, he's watching the nurse who was taking care of this guy, and she's outside crying. It is explained throughout there why Murphy is watching her, why he always watches her, actually. And it's because she has some kind of compassion left. She still, feels for everyone she has to see. She still is torn apart by everything that she has to see. And he can relate to her on that front, but he, never goes and talks to her. Now, the story gets even worse from there because this girl goes into a synagogue cathedral thing to pray for this soldier, and they get bombed. You have Murphy who runs for this girl to go save her, but we all know she's already gone. And he takes her back to base where her friends, the fellow doctors and all of that, take care of her even though she's already gone. And it's just, you see how that just kind of pushes Murphy even further. And you have Bartle, who is noticing these symptoms, these kind of almost suicidal symptoms, and he goes to their sergeants, and they don't do anything about it. They kind of have this cynical look of, if he can't handle it, that's his problem. And I think that's really, really disturbing on that front, and it's just, they should have done something, because later on in the story, Murphy goes missing. When Murphy goes missing, not much happens. You get Bartle, who begins freaking out, and, they kind of form a group to go search for him. They go and they talk to, townspeople, and they begin questioning what happened to him, and they're piecing together this puzzle. Now, Bartle, who knew of these suicidal tendencies, who told Sergeant Sterling about these suicidal reactions that Murphy was having, he's beginning to piece it together. He's beginning to really fear for his friend, that his friend went off and did something incredibly stupid. As a reader, you begin to see it too. You begin to kind of have that palpitating fear of, oh my god, he, killed himself, and he couldn't cope with it, and, you feel really, really bad for this character. But that's not at all what happens. And this is the bit that I'm just really not okay with. Just horrendously not okay with. So you get Bartle and Sergeant Sterling, who find Murphy's body. So they find Murphy's body, and it's below a window that has been broken. And their first thought is he jumped. He, killed himself until they, turned his body over, in which case it has to be the most gruesome, disturbing thing I've ever read. And I wish I never read it because I will honestly admit I had nightmares about that. So they turn over Murphy, and he is just pretty much mutilated. So they already know he didn't commit suicide, that someone, took him and tortured him and completely disfigured him and just did these horrendous things to another human being and then threw him out the window like it was nothing. So they find him. Bartle's freaking out because, that was his friend. And the Sergeant Sterling then realizes what has happened and decides that they need to get rid of the body. They need to burn it, that he would just be labeled as missing in action. Bartle agrees, and at first I didn't agree with him. I was like, why would you do that? And then after a lot of thought and consideration, I kind of understand it. Now, if I had the option to know if one of my loved ones went missing in action, killed in action, or if they were tortured and mutilated, I would honestly pick killed in action. I mean, that would be the most logical sense, but because there won't be a body, that only leaves two options of missing in action or the worst of the two. Now, I understand that missing in action, you really want to believe that that loved one isn't out there suffering, that they just, maybe did just die, and you really want to believe that, but I would still take that over knowing what happened to this poor guy, because I don't think a parent, especially his mother, would have been able to cope with the truth. I sure as hell could not cope with that, and that was just reading. So that is where the war bit ends for Bartle. It then progresses to them leaving the war, and this is, again, laced throughout the story, so you have to, again, pay attention to the dates, because it starts off with war, but then it's him in Germany, and then back in war, then in the future, and it's very confusing. So we're going out into where he's in Germany, he's heading home. In the beginning, you don't know what happened to Murphy. You have no idea at all what's happened to him and why he's so tormented. I mean, we can grasp that war does that to people, but to the degree I didn't really understand until you get later on in the book. Bartle goes into a church. He is not a religious person. He clearly states that in the book. And he goes and he talks to a priest because he is unable to cope with it. But he doesn't tell the priest actually what has happened, what's bothering him. But he ends up asking the priest to say a prayer for Murphy. And that's your first hint that Murphy was dead. It then goes on that he sees Sergeant Sterling, so you can assume that they're both going back to America and everything is not okay, but they're both going back and they're in a brothel, so that's okay. And you can this is when you start to see what a douche Sergeant Sterling is, because he is a very violent, almost psychopath, and I don't like him. I don't like him at all. The next bit is him on the plane, and, he's still kind of tormented in the same token, but it's not really stated, again, what happened, and that's where it cuts off, because then it's him in his future. He's back at home with his mother. At home with his mother, things are very different. He's depressed. He doesn't want to do anything. He spends all his time drinking. And, you really, at first, don't agree with it, because you're like, pull yourself together, man. Come on. And you're kind of rooting for him. But as you get further into the story of what happened to him in Iraq, you begin to, recognize and understand why he's like that when he gets back home. There is an instance where his mother talks him into going out with some of his old friends, where he doesn't actually go out with them, but he's kind of close by them. They're like on the opposite side of the lake or something. Anyways, Bartle goes into the lake and is looking up at the stars as he's floating around, and then he falls asleep. And it's never really specified if that was on purpose, if he was trying to kill himself, what was happening. It was never truly specified, which, that instance, the last thing you read is he fell asleep, and you're like, oh my god. And, I mean, we all know he lives, but you still just kind of like, oh god. His friends that are across the lake spot him, and his one friend comes, pulls him out of the lake, and saves him. It is then that Bartle decides that he's moving out. He's not having any of this, and he kind of moves into his own flat and becomes a recluse. He only comes out of his apartment to pay his rent and to go buy a beer. And, it's just, you feel so bad for this character, especially when you find out that the government's looking for him. And, you have his mother telling him this, like, these people are coming to the house looking for you. As a good mother, she does not tell them where he's at. And, you're just sitting there like, why the hell is the government looking for him? And when you find out why, it's at the very end, it's after already what happened to Murphy, so you can kind of assume why they're looking for him. It turns out that Bartle wrote a letter to Murphy's mother, pretending to be Murphy, I believe it was, and explaining what happened to him. And just, I kind of just really wanted to hit Bartle at this point, because in my head I'm like, why would you do that? What is wrong with you? Murphy's mother then goes to the government because she was told that he was killed in action, when in reality that wasn't what happened, that her son was, tortured and horrible things happened to him, and no one did anything to help. Now, you would think that the government would go searching for Sergeant Sterling, but it turns out he put a gun to his own head and killed himself, because why? He couldn't cope with it. And that, I will say, was very distressing. Even though I didn't like him as a character, you're like, oh God, like, because then immediately all the blame is gonna fall on Bartle. And, I really kind of got mad at the government for this one, because they arrest him and they put him in jail. And I'm just sitting there like, why? Why would you do that? He did what he needed to do. He went to his sergeant about, his friend having these, almost suicidal thoughts and actions, and they did nothing about it. It wasn't his fault. Granted, yes, he was an accomplice in disposing of the body, but again, I kind of agree with that, because I don't know if initially his main action was to protect Murphy's mother or to protect himself, but, again, I would have much preferred to know if one of my loved ones just went missing in action compared to what in actuality happened. And that's where the story ends, is him, being let off into jail, being told, he'll be let out on good behavior, it's not going to be as bad as he thinks it is. And I just got so mad at the government, because what the hell? Just seriously, what the hell? That is the ending of the book. It just kind of, continuously switches between dates and all of that, and it's a very emotionally draining book. And I mean, I do recommend it to people, but if you have a friend, or if you know anybody who's been in the war, I do not recommend this book, because you're going to sit there and just kind of be like, okay, they had to go through that, and you are not going to be okay with it. You're not. This book, I have to wonder if it is based off of true events of what happened to Kevin Powers. I mean, not all of it, but certain aspects, I really have to wonder, because the amount of detail that went into it, and I understand he was in war himself, but it just, certain parts that I have to really, really wonder about, and it really tears you apart on the inside, and I feel so bad for this author. And I'm happy for him now, because it states that, he got married, he carried on with his life, I don't know if he got help, but he pulled through in the end, and he got married, like I said, and it's just, I mean, I'm happy I read this book. I really am, but I will never read it again. Never. All in all, I would give this book an A, because although, yes, it emotionally tears you apart, it was profoundly written. It really does pull you into the story, and you feel for each and every single character. And you just, oh my God, but I'm not okay with it. I don't know if it's because the war is still going on, that the thought that there are people out there who do some of the things that are said in this book to other human beings, if that's what bothers me, because yes, that is what bothers me mainly. But just all in all, it's just a very bothersome book, but in a very good way. It is now time for the next book, in which case I am really, really hoping it is kind of one of those happy pick-me-up books, because if not, I might just cry. Well, this one. So we have, oops, if you can read that, the R's missing. But we are looking for Alaska. Woo! In the dark beside me, she smelled of sweat and sunshine and vanilla, and on that thin moon night I could see a little more than her silhouette. But even in the dark I could see her eyes, fierce emeralds, and not just beautiful, but hot too. Alaska Young, gorgeous, clever, funny, sexy, screwed up, and utterly fascinating. Miles Halter could not be more in love with her, but when tragedy strikes, Miles discovers the value and pain of living and loving unconditionally. Nothing will ever be the same again. I will be back with a review on this one. Yellowbirds is an A. I do recommend it, though, if you do not have a strong stomach, or this is, you're not okay with the war, or if you know someone who's been in war, I might not recommend it to you. But other than that, yeah. Or maybe, in a few years down the line, read it. Until then, you guys, happy reading. Bye!